Hey everybody, Jared here. I'm experimenting with Square Video so I can use this in multiple places. Also, I need a haircut. So, a faculty member who I'm friends with and who I've known for a very long time, her husband is a fraternity brother of mine and their child was a former student, emailed me about the use of gaming in education. And because it was a great question, I figured I would make a video that I would send to them so that they can watch the video and then we can have a conversation later. Now, I love talking about educational gaming. I really, really do. And you've probably seen my videos before where I talk about the fact is that most educational games are neither educational nor are they games. And that becomes a really big challenge. Most of the time, we talk about what do we learn from gaming? And the answer is usually very little because of this thing called the magic circle. Game space is a place that we enter into knowing we're there to have fun, knowing that the risks we take aren't real. And because that space is so cushioned, we usually don't have very much educational transfer outside of it. Getting good at playing a game means you're usually pretty good at playing the game, and that's about it. And it's really weird, and people get very upset about this, and it's nothing to be upset about. It's just the way that our brain works. We often get really good at doing something within the game, and then outside of the game, we don't relate to it at all. The exception of that being simulation, because a simulation truly isn't a game. It's just a one-to-one correlation of I did it here, it's the same thing. But in this case, they were talking about something more advanced than just a quiz, which, by the way, isn't a game either. A quiz is just a game. It's a test with a gamified result. It's like, haha, you've won and you get a prize versus you've won and you get a grade. Like, that's what a quiz is. But really, and a quiz is a puzzle, by the way, because once you know all the questions, why would you take the quiz again? The replayability of quizzes and the replayability of puzzles becomes a big question as well. So what really we're talking about is how do we create engagement? But this is at a graduate level. And this was for nursing students. And this was something high level. So we're going to assume that anybody who is entering whatever game space we're talking about here is entering it willing and understanding that there is meant to be a real world connection here. I'm a little less concerned by the magic circle, but I am concerned is by three elements. And the three elements that I'm always looking at when it comes to truly educational gaming would be, is it fun / engaging? Is it accurate / accurate? And is it effective? You know, engaging, accurate, and effective are the three things that we need to look for. Let's talk about this as a role-playing game scenario. Because again, I think role-playing games would be the best scenario here. Let's say there was some medical role-playing game scenario. Well, let's say you're playing this thing and it's a lot of fun. But what if it isn't accurate at all? What if it's all just, it's all bullshit medicine? Well, you're like, well, that's no good. No, there's nothing wrong with that because, again, if we're playing a game, we're playing it to have fun. And if the engagement is our number one priority, which, by the way, it is, if we think about all the things like, D&D and any of the other types of role-playing games, one of the things that we tend to look at first is where is our willing suspension of disbelief? Where are our lines that we don't talk about? Like, you've got an infection, you didn't have enough money, you're hungry, all the types of things that we're not always thinking about because that's where our willing suspension of disbelief is. And our willing suspension of disbelief says that our engagement and our enjoyment and our fun is more important than our accuracy, which is fine because, again, we pick and choose what level of sort of games lawyer we want to be in any of our gaming environments. But if we are trying to make sure that what we're learning is real, then we have to make sure that the second element, the accuracy, is number one, that we can't ever sacrifice any of the things, well, we're going to leave that factor out because it's not very fun, because we can't do that if there's a real world implication of what we're trying to do. So whatever scenario we build, whatever game we play, all the information, all the processing, all the knowledge, all the facts has to be accurate. That becomes number one. Number two is it engaging? Because if I build this wonderful simulation or this wonderful role-playing game or this wonderful anything, and then I find out that it's 100% accurate, but nobody wants to play it, well then it's inefficient either because no one's going to play it. So it's got to be accurate, and then it's got to be engaging versus the other way around. And the third one is assessment. And that is, let's say you build an environment, you build a role-playing game, you find something, and you're like, this is the right knowledge. It is accurate, and people want to play it. Now the question is, Was it effective? In the sense of now we have to go back and test to find out whether or not what you did during the game translated into knowledge that encoded in a way that you'll be able to use afterwards. So if your knowledge is only useful within the simulation, but in the real world, you're like, oh, I always tell people that one of my favorite, absolutely favorite movies of all time is Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World. Now, at this point, I was watching the movie, and I had just finished reading all of these, nautical books. I've been reading like tons of these books, not this series, by the way, a different series. And right in the middle of it, the mast comes over, there's all this wreckage, there's somebody hanging from the wreckage, and this wreckage is like off to the side, there's all these, ropes and cables and there's wreckage, and they're telling someone to swim for the wreckage. And I literally, under my breath, muttered, oh my God, if they don't cut off that wreckage, it's gonna form a sea anchor and sink the ship. And all of a sudden somebody goes, Captain, if we don't cut off this wreckage, it's gonna form a sea anchor and sink the ship. And the person I was with was like, how would you know that? I'm like, I've read a lot of books. But it's weird because I was shocked. I was shocked that I was able to transfer a situation or a series of situations that I'd read in other books where I'm like, oh, I've learned that, wreckage off the side of a boat can be very dangerous in a storm and that can take them down. You'd have to cut off the wreckage. And I was able to take the knowledge from reading a story and transfer it to watching this film where I'd seen it in the first time in the real life ever. And I was able to put the two together. And I'm like, oh, that's knowledge transfer. And how we look at that is the most useful thing ever. Because if you sit here and go like, I know all the information, I have it all, and I can only use it when I'm being quizzed, but I can't use it when I'm in the scenario, and that scenario isn't the role-playing game scenario, but the real-life scenario, then your simulation doesn't feel right. Your simulation isn't parallel enough, or the knowledge isn't being fed to you in a way that you can use again at a later date. And those are the things that I really look for. Now, when it comes to educational gaming, the last thing is this, is I often rant about the fact that I hate trivia games because they're puzzles. Once you know all the facts, you've solved the puzzle. I hate puzzle games because they're not really games. Puzzles are solved and they're not replayable. But this is the one scenario where I will say that puzzles are very useful, because puzzles in a simulation, yes, you've played through the simulation, you know how the simulation is, you're not going to use a simulation. The idea is that the goal is not replayability. The goal is that when you play this simulation, I view it like a sponge, you've squeezed it, and what comes out is once. Whatever you get out of that is the one shot you get out of that. So you might run through the simulation, squeeze it, and get a little bit. You might run through the simulation, squeeze it, and get a lot, and that's going to be based on how your engagement is. And that's the weird thing about using simulation or gaming in education, and that is that it's not going to be sort of an equivalency across the board. And that's why you need lots of these things, and that's why assessment becomes critical, is that when we give, a simple, here's the book, and here's the knowledge, and there's the quiz, and then we give a threshold from it, the threshold lets me know, you got enough of what I needed. But since you may get less from this and someone may get more from this, the use of gaming in education, the use of simulation education can be useful to feed in, but it's not an absolute, because if you don't get enough, where are you going to get the rest from? That's my mini rant on educational gaming. And again, not anti it, but all the things we have to look for are the accuracy, engagement, and effectiveness. And most of the time when people are selling things, they sell things on engagement as number one, because again, they're selling it as a game. And so I want you to sort of look at it from that perspective. There's some really interesting simulations out there. Again, I would have to find out how accurate they were. And the only way to find out how accurate and how effective they are is to use them, which means you end up piloting and find out whether this does what you want it to do or not. So it never works the first time. Really, it's never going to be like, oh, great, I pulled it off the shelf, it's great. It's going to be, we tested it the first time and it worked. Now we know we can use it. Not off the shelf, I'm good to go. So there you go. I hope this was helpful. And for the person who I'm sending this video to, give me a call. We can have a conversation. And you bastard, you're going to Gen Con and I'm not.